In this video, we're going to talk about how to solve an equation using the quadratic formula, or how to solve a quadratic equation using the quadratic formula. The first thing that you need to know is the quadratic formula. It's highlighted here in pink. The quadratic formula says x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. The purpose of doing this is similar to what we were doing when we were solving by factoring. We want to find our x-intercepts or our solutions or our roots, those all mean the same thing, for our quadratic equation, which really means where does my parabola, my graph, cross the x-axis. So not all equations you can factor, but every single quadratic equation you can find the roots or the solutions or the zeros using the quadratic formula. So this is a surefire way for every single quadratic equation on how to solve it. So what you have to remember, you want to take your quadratic equation and make sure that it's in standard form and it's set equal to 0. So that means that we are here where you have ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. So we have to find the a, the b, and the c for the quadratic formula in our equation. The a value comes with the number, or the a value is the number that's x next to the x squared. The b is the number that's next to the x, and the c is the number that's by itself with no variable next to it, which is called a constant. So let's do our first example. So my first example says 5x squared minus 8x, plus 3 is equal to 0. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write out my a, my b, and my c value. So the value that's next to x squared is 5. My value that's next to x, my b value, is negative 8. And my c value, the value that's all by itself with no variable, or what we call our constant, is positive 3. And I'm going to put this in my quadratic formula, so I'm going to rewrite it over here kind of small so I remember. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so I'm going to plug it in. So I get x is equal to negative b. Now, since b is a negative number, the negative of negative b, or the opposite of b, is 8. X is equal to 8 plus or minus the square root of b squared. And when I plug in my numbers, I'm always using parentheses. Negative 8 squared minus 4 times my a value is 5 and my c value is 3 all over 2 times a. Now when we're evaluating the quadratic formula, the first thing we want to evaluate is right here inside my square root. So I'm going to multiply that out first. So I get x is equal to 8 plus or minus, and we'll talk about what the plus or minus means when we get to the very end. It just means we're going to have two answers. Plus or minus the square root and multiply this out. Negative 8 squared is 64. And then I want to multiply negative 4 times positive 5 times 3. So negative 4 times positive 5 is negative 20, and negative 20 times 3 is negative 60. All divided by, oops, that's funny, all divided by 2 times 5, which is 10. Okay, so I'm going to still keep simplifying underneath my square root. So I get x is equal to 8, sorry, the stylus is being silly, 8 plus or minus the square root of 64 minus 60 is 4, divided by 10. Okay, and I can also keep going because I know the square root of 4 is equal to 2. So now I'm left with my nice breakdown, and I'm going to figure out what my final answer is, and this is where the plus or minus comes into play. So this means that x is equal to 8 plus 2 divided by 10, and x is equal to, 8 minus 2 divided by 10. So 8 plus 2 is 10 over 10, and 10 over 10 is equal to 1, so that's one of my answers. And 8 minus 2 that's equal to 6 over 10, and I can reduce 6 over 10. What number both goes into 6 and 10? 2. 2 goes into 6 3 times, and 2 goes into 10 5 times. So 3/5 and 1 are my final answer. So we'll make that kind of big up here. So here x is equal to 1 and 3/5. Those are my two solutions. That means that my graph, my parabola, is going to cross my axis 2 times at x is equal to 1 and x is equal to 3/5. Next example. Okay, I have to write out my a, my b, and my c value. So here my a value is equal to -1 because that's the number that's next to my x squared. My b value is equal to +1, and so is my c value. So I'm going to do my quadratic formula. X is equal to -b, so the opposite of b, -1, plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is 1 squared, minus 4 times a is -1 times c is +1, all divided by 2 times -1. I'm going to evaluate inside my square root first. So I get x is equal to -1 plus or minus the square root. 1 squared is 1. -4 times -1 times +1 is +4. All over -2. And I'm going to simplify, keep going inside my square root. So I get -1 plus or minus the square root of 5. All divided by -2. And then I write out my answer. I can't simplify my square root of 5 any. So I'm going to simplify it out and write out my two choices. So I have x is equal to -1 plus the square root of 5. Whoa. Divided by -2. And x is equal to -1 minus the square root of 5. Divided by -2. We can leave our answer just like this. The only reason we would want to know what it is as a decimal is if we were doing a sketch of our graph. So in fact, you would just leave your answer written like this to have what your two answers are. Sometimes you'll notice in a textbook or something, they're going to leave their answer like this. They're not even going to write out the two answers. They're just going to leave the plus or minus. That is also acceptable, but when we're learning, we're going to write out both answers so that we understand that this actually gives us two answers. Our last example is probably the trickiest. So the first thing that we have to do is recognize that this is not written in standard form and set equal to 0. So first thing I'm going to do is set this equal to 0. I'm going to move everything to the left-hand side because I like my a value to be positive. So I'm going to do two steps at once. I have to get rid of the 7. So I'm going to subtract 7 from both sides, and I also have to get rid of the 2x. So I'm going to add 2x to both sides. So this goes away and this goes away, and I end up with 0. And on my left side, I have 3x squared plus 2x minus 7. I wrote it that way on purpose because I want to write it in descending order so that it looks like ax squared plus bx plus c. So now I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to write out my a, my b, and my c values. Here my a value is going to equal 3 because that's the value that's next to x squared. My b value is going to equal 2 because that's the number that's next to x. And my c value is going to equal -7 because that's the value that's by itself, the constant with no x. Now I plug this into the quadratic formula. X is equal to -b, or the opposite of b. So b is 2, so the opposite would be -2, plus or minus the square root of, b squared, 2 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 3, and c, which is -7, all divided by 2 times a, which is 3. Remember, first thing we're going to simplify is right underneath the square root here. We're going to figure that out first. So let's go with that. So I got x is equal to -2 plus or minus the square root. Okay, 2 squared is 4. I have a -4 times a +3 times a -7. So a negative times a negative is going to be a positive. And then I have to figure out how much is 4 times 3 times 7. If you don't know that off the top of your head, you can use the calculator because that's what I did. So that's going to give me 84. All divided by 2 times 3, which is 6. I'm going to keep simplifying underneath my square root. And I get 4 plus 84 is going to give me 88. Whoops. All divided by 6. Now you might say, cool, I'm done. Well, you have to remember back when we learned how to simplify square roots. So I have to break down my square root first, and then I can simplify a little bit more because the goal is to simplify it as much as possible. So when I simplify square roots, we're going to say, okay, what two numbers multiply to 88? 11 times 8. 11 is a prime number. What two numbers multiply to 8? 4 times 2. 2 is a prime number. What two numbers multiply to 4? 2 and 2. 2 is the prime number. I have to say, all right, I want to know if I have pairs of numbers. So here I have a pair of 2's, and wherever I have a pair of numbers that can come outside of my square root. So I'm going to say this simplifies, to 2. This 2 right here and this 11 right here, they don't have any pairs. They don't have any matches. So they go back inside my square root, and I multiply them together. 2 times 11. So the square root of 88 reduces down to 2 times the square root of 22. So I'm going to put that back in my problem. -2 plus or minus 2 times the square root of 22 divided by 6. Now the last thing I want to look at is in my numerator here, I have 2 terms. I have here, I have this term, -2, and I have this term, 2 times the square root of 22. I want to know, do they have a greatest common factor? Do they have a GCF? What do they have in common? They both have in common a 2. So I can factor it out. 2, and when I factor it out, 2 times how much is -2? -1. 2 times how much is 2 times the square root of 22? Just the square root of 22. All divided by 6. And now I can reduce my fractions out in front. So I'm looking here and here to do reducing. What number goes into both 2 and 6? 2 goes into 2 and 6. 2 goes into 2 once. 2 goes into 6 3 times. So my final answer is -1 plus or minus the square root of 22, all divided by 3. Now I said you can leave your answer like this, or so that you can remember that you have 2 answers. Your actual answers are x is equal to -1 plus the square root of 22 divided by 3, and x is equal to -1 minus the square root of 22, all divided by 3. Final answers. Good luck. If you have any questions, let me know.